Okay, thanks everyone. It just kind of feels surreal. This, so there must have been, it's our first conference by virtual. I think it's kind of, so trial error. So please do bear with us. We got the session days around social outcomes, as you'll have seen, and great. Appreciate the panel for their time today. We'll do, if the panel, we can introduce ourselves. So I'm going to chair, Mike Butler, Managing Director of Peopletoo. Peopletoo, we're affiliate members of CCIN and have been, I think, for our third year, I think, as affiliate members for CCIN, and we are sponsoring the policy lab around social outcomes. Hayley, does everybody else on the panel just want to give a quick intro?
Yeah. I'm Hayley Johnson. I'm the Corporate Lead Strategy and Performance at South Tyneside Council. So we are a council at the mouth of the Tyne, sandwiched between the cities of Sunderland and Newcastle. And I'm responsible for a lot of the council's support services and also to support the cabinet member for cooperatives, volunteer and social action.
Okay, my name is Phil Varghese. I'm a social work manager in Salford City Council. I manage the leaving care service known as Next Step in Salford and the missing from home service, and I'll be talking about the outcomes for care leavers and how the local offer can be improved and also improve outcomes for care leavers nationally.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Chatfield?
Yeah, I'm Councillor Tristan Chatfield from Birmingham City Council, a cabinet member for finance and resources. For those who don't know where Birmingham is, it's the big blob in the middle of the map. It's a city of 1.1 million people, so substantial.
Thanks. I'll just do some intros and just where we are around the policy lab and some of our own experience and why social outcomes, and I'll hand over to the panel for their experiences. So I think this started with a policy lab where we put forward a suggestion around social outcomes. And I think social outcomes more in the sense of, we'll call it better life opportunities. So we recognized that there was social value in procurement, and that's a sort of formal process, lots of progress around social value, the portals and the TOMs. What we, in our experience, saw was a lot of really great practice and what we would call sort of general social outcomes that councils were doing across the country, but weren't being measured or recognized as sort of formal social value. We then approached the policy lab last year with CCIN. That was approved. And for COVID and other reasons, it's taken a while for us to get the policy lab up and running. We had some workshops the end of last year, which some of you may have been involved in. But we were greatly fortunate because Hayley and South Tyneside have kindly volunteered to be the lead for the policy lab, lead CCI member for the policy lab on the social outcomes. And Birmingham have also agreed to be part of our group. And we've got, there's a half a dozen others who want to participate in, and effectively an initial group looking at how we could define this policy lab project around social outcomes. And I think at the moment, the key strands are how could, from this perspective, a council look at a sort of corporate framework for social outcomes so it becomes systematic and part of the culture across the organisation, and not just something that procurement colleagues need to do as part of a procurement exercise. Secondly, is there some really valuable best practice that could be gained and looking at individual service areas? And we'll come on to that in the panel. We'll talk about some of the initiatives, from big strategic initiatives to what we would call day-to-day operational opportunities. So could there be a sort of a useful toolkit, if you like, of best practice ideas at a service level, which I think from that perspective would be very good. And then the third is, could CCIN, through CCIN, we could create a sort of a library of some really best practice examples that everybody could be learning from as part of a learning. So that was the sort of general premises. And we are meeting, first meeting is next week, actually on the 13th, with a core group of councils. Part of that will be then looking at some research, what's happening in those councils, and what would really be useful for councils going forwards. And then when we get to that kind of stage, we'll widen that out to the broader CCIN network. So that's where we are with this particular initiative. I think in terms of some of our own experience, before I hand to the panel, which started us, why are we doing this? And I think it's probably really begin because we've seen that best practice out there. So we do a lot of work in transformation in children's, adults, property, FM, transport. And I think just one or two examples before I hand over is some of you will be aware of the Youth Foods Initiative in Cardiff, where Cardiff Council, a CCIN member, looked at actually an alternative to their traditional catering canteen model. Trade unions actually led an initiative which the council have supported to the Jamie Oliver Kids Off the Street. And they're now well into a program where they've transformed that catering. I think the first tranche was 10 apprenticeships came through, and that Youth Foods is now up and running, and actually, interestingly, had a real vital role, continues to play a vital role in the COVID response. So great opportunities. They also work with social care to target some of them around NEETs. And so that's created this sort of opportunities. There's a real opportunity to I think from that perspective, to roll that out to other areas. You could have youth food, we could have youth environment, youth digital, and then I know they're looking at a dementia cafe now in one of the parks. But that's really been a great initiative, and you know, I think the real value, community value of that is quite easy to see. We've seen it in facilities management where, you know, there's a real issue in the traditional outsource market. We did some work with the council then. We looked at what of that FM could you bring back in-house, and some of that is financially driven, and actually we found niches where that could be, financially more competitive in-house. But critically, we could target employment and again apprenticeships and work experience internally. So in the council, we created 60 internal jobs from a disparate supply chain, where we felt that could be created and a great employment opportunity. And in social care, I think, you know, as everybody knows, there's huge opportunities in social care, and we've seen a great initiatives in children's around early help. So I think we started on that journey, and then having met so many people, and particularly in CCIN, some great opportunities. So I think that's where we got to. But enough of me. So if we go, I think the panel are going to do about 10 minutes each, just on their own experiences around social outcomes and a broad perspective. So, and I've heard some of this, and it's great. So, Councillor Chatfield, do you want to start us in terms of Birmingham?
Yeah, we can do. I suppose Birmingham's journey, for a bit of history before we get into where we are now. Really, I suppose in 2012, we were probably at sort of the forefront of councils who were leading the way in terms of social value, and made quite early strides in terms of developing our own Birmingham Charter for Business Social Responsibility, which actually contained a lot of really strong things at the time, and actually I think was genuinely recognised as being a sort of bit of a national leader. I think the issue for us then was what happened, perhaps inevitably, is there was a great fanfare. It was launched and a lot of companies signed up to it. We've got about 500 companies signed up to it now, but that was always a very top-down approach, and I think it's safe to say that kind of top-down approach to social value has kind of been a main consistent theme in Birmingham for over the last few years. I think where there is kind of corporate focus and corporate action, we have driven some really big changes and big benefits to the city, but it's not become mainstream perhaps in a way that I would hope. And I think over the last 18 months since I came into the portfolio, we've tried to develop a way of making it more integrated into the systems of the council and into the thinking of officers all the way through the organisation and elected members. But getting on to sort of probably a more positive note, I think what we can do in Birmingham, the advantage we do have, and I sort of jokingly referred to our size earlier, but we do have scale, and we do have big projects that happen in our city as a result of that scale. You'll no doubt be aware of the fact we are hosting the Commonwealth Games, and off the back of that now we have the large scale regeneration of an area of the city, Perry Bar, which is a big and neglected part of the city where a university had vacated a very large site and left us with a huge hole in the sort of northwest part of our city. And the Commonwealth Games, sort of the trigger for wider regeneration of that area through what was the village, but is now just a broader housing regeneration. So sort of, as well as that, there's sort of 3 other major schemes it's probably worth, and major contracts it's probably worth talking a little bit about. One of them is our housing and repairs service. We have obviously a large number of council properties still, whilst we did dispose of a large number, not right to buy, but also into housing associations. We've still got around 65,000 council properties, so the maintenance contracts for those are very substantial, and offer an opportunity to get serious social value through those. We've also got large waste disposal contract with Veolia. I'm sure many other local authorities have similar arrangements. And then we have a site called Pedamore, which is a large industrial site in the or it's actually a greenfield site, but it's been converted to industrial again on the northern edge of the city. And a lot of jobs. Actually, that project hasn't happened yet, but through the deal with the developer, we've already managed to deliver some substantial social value. So just some of the big sort of numbers that we have managed to deliver. So we've got number of works, sort of hours of local employment, we think is something around 37,000 weeks of local employment generated off the back of those, just those 4 big areas of work. Apprenticeships, 7,000 weeks of apprenticeships delivered. Work placements, 4,500. And then just in terms of the local spend, one of the things we're really proud of in Birmingham is the high level of local spend we deliver for our contracts. So at the last time of checking, it was well over 60% of our contract spend is spent locally, and that's something we've managed to maintain consistently all the way through. Obviously, we do have quite a well-developed local economy. It's not just in Birmingham, but in the broader West Midlands region. We do have a strong regional economy in terms of contractors, building firms, demolition firms, all the kind of mainstream stuff you'd expect, but also quite a strong care sector as well. So that's something around the £260 million mark is around what we think we've spent locally off the back of those 4 big contracts. At 5.5 million of which are with social enterprises. And again, this is an area we're keen to develop, and something that perhaps generally across the board, I'd say something that isn't perhaps well understood or well utilised is that distinction between corporations and those social enterprises that we might want to support anyway, and whether there's the way to link into those through our procurement processes. And we're just developing a system, a more clear-cut system of being able to identify whether who we contract with are sort of standard companies or whether they are social enterprises, and that allows us perhaps to encourage and promote those social enterprises. And then just a couple of back to what we describe as the softer end of it. So 38,000 hours of voluntary time given to local charities and organisations, and then directly raised £350,000 for local charities off the back of that as well. But I think there's probably quite a few lessons that we can kind of take from all of this, is that yes, we can deliver stuff off the back of the big contracts. But as I said, I think what we need to get to a position to is where it's more mainstream through the organisation. And we have taken a number of steps towards that, but I wouldn't say we're anywhere near getting the final version of that at all. So we've done things like review social value training through the organisation. So our procurement officers will deliver social value training into the organisation. That's had quite a high take up and something that's been sort of positively welcomed. A lot of officers are very willing, but perhaps don't have the knowledge about how to make that social value what they want to achieve, how to link that into the procurements they're doing. So that's a big part of our work. Doing a lot of more, and actually what's interesting about lockdown actually is has allowed us actually to become through teams and all these kind of mechanisms that we're all now using to establish teams groups around social value that have a range of officers in them. So it makes things a bit more direct and clear cut, and experience can be shared regularly. People can post whenever they want to, and that resource is always available. So actually sort of innovation through necessity, I think, is probably how you describe that. We are changing over to our ERP. We've got a new ERP system coming. We're going to change to Oracle, and that's a obviously big organisational shift, and that's coming in August. But what we've tried to do all the way through, and our procurement team were integral all the way through of that, is to make sure that we've got all the facilities we need within that to allow us to properly track social value through that. So rather than having to use different systems, or as the case has often been in the past, is simply using spreadsheets. It's a slightly controversial subject given the way the government are handling things. But anyway, using spreadsheets to keep a track of all the social value outcomes, getting much more sophisticated off the back of our new ERP system. And also, just kind of one of the things that I think we have become much more dedicated to is simply making sure that when reports come forward from officers, what we do as cabinet members and as senior officers in the organisation is to push back and ask those questions about social value, to just not accept the kind of standardised answers. I think there's always a little bit of copy and paste in any large organisation. And so what we've tried to do is really dig down and say, well, have you thought about this? So there's a degree of kind of internal challenge, which is time consuming and sometimes can be challenging in terms of getting people to focus on that. But I think actually, once you've done that consistently with bits of the organisation over a period of time, you do start to find it's embedded. So for example, one area where perhaps we weren't particularly strong was around school builds. So where we're building new school buildings, additional capacity, etc. That part of the council service is now really, really strong at working with the contractors to get those social value outcomes and thinking about social value right at the outset. So things like right early in the commissioning process to think about what we're trying to achieve. So good examples in Birmingham, we've got a big focus on skills, especially around engineering, mechanical engineering, those kind of qualifications that especially young girls in Birmingham don't tend to go into. So one thing we've really tried to drive through all of our contracts around schools is to create a close link between those firms that are providing those buildings and the schools themselves they're delivering them for, and perhaps primary schools, secondary schools in the area as well, the broader school clusters. So again, that's something where it is intensive initially, but actually once you get that thinking embedded, you kind of hopefully then get permanent benefits off the back of it. I think the last thing, I've got a couple of minutes left. The last thing I'll just mention really is necessity, obviously, for all of this is collaboration with the sector you're seeking to work with. And I think a lot of that is done through things. We have the Living Wage City initiative in Birmingham that we're driving forward at the moment, which is an attempt to get employers more broadly and anchor institutions that do commissioning to buy into the concept of it being a living wage city. So the council has always, ever since 2012, had a strong Birmingham living wage policy. Long before the government had its living wage, there's a Birmingham living wage, and we've sought to drive that through all our contracts. It's been difficult in the care sector, but beyond the care sector, broadly, we've been quite successful in terms of driving that through. So what the Living Wage City initiative is an attempt to broaden the range of organisations, the range of commissioners that are using that. So we've got big partners like National Express who operate our local bus services, universities as well. They've had some difficulty with Birmingham University itself, but the other universities, Aston and BCU, have been very on board and supportive. And I think just driving that through has been really positive for us as an organisation, showing that collaboration can work. It's early days of that. It was only an initiative launched last year, but I think we are really positive about where that's heading. And then we also do things like marketplace days where we bring people in, bring companies, small companies, we invite them all in. We've got databases of thousands of local companies. We invite them into the council house, bring them in for a breakfast meeting, talk to them about what opportunities there are, bring in some of those the officers and organisations responsible for those big opportunities, and try and build up local relationships that way. So that's just, it's been a bit of a quick run through, but that's just some of the learning in Birmingham. I said we're new to the CCIN, so it's really, really positive for us to be able to engage with this. It's been really, really helpful for me already. And we're happy to take any questions later, but if organisations, individuals, councils want to talk further, always happy to, we're always around. I'll make sure our details can be circulated later. So if people want to get in touch, we do have some experience, some good, some bad, but we're more than happy to share all of those with you. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Councillor Chatfield. That's absolutely great. Hayley from up in the north.
Hello, thank you for having me. Thank you to everybody who's joined. Just a little brag that we are still the Cooperative Council of the Year due to COVID. We've got that for the second year. So we've been supporting across the organisation cooperative working for a while. So I wanted to talk a little bit about perhaps how I've got involved, and picking up very much on Councillor Chatfield's point that people do want to get involved, but they don't necessarily know how to. So how do you get officers involved, and perhaps how did I get involved? So what social value and social outcomes mean to me, I've got two guilty pleasures. I'm sure I've told some of you this before. One of them is reading Donald Trump's Twitter feed, which I find fascinating, and the other is a little dip into etymology. So I started this morning, I got up and thought, where did that, what's the origin of the word social? Where did that come from? So this is just a fun fact I found from Google, that the Socii were allies of the Roman Republic, although they did rebel against Rome in 91 BC in the Social War. So the word social's been around obviously over 2,000 years, and we all have different interpretations of it. And I think in local government particularly, it can feel that's somebody else's job. And I think the Social Value Act really did sort of drive social outcomes through procurement, which obviously is happening over in Birmingham. But actually, my experience in South Tyneside has been different again to Councillor Chatfield. It's been very much from the bottom up, but we do have absolutely fantastic elected member champions. So we've got wonderfully passionate leader in Councillor Ian Malcolm, who I know was at the beginning of the conference, very supportive leader of what we try to do. And we also have a cabinet member for cooperatives and partnerships who really champions this area right across our communities in South Tyneside. So the way I've got involved in this is actually through my communications hat, if you like. So I manage a lot of the back office, but I kind of got into this through communication, so a different route. So I just wanted to talk about how we can get involved in different ways and not that top-down approach. So Love South Tyneside has really been the vehicle that has brought me to social action, and that grew from me as a comms lead wanting people of South Tyneside to talk the place up. I wanted people to say, I'm really proud of where I live. You know, we're on the coast, we've got the beautiful beaches, we've got parks, and we've got excellent schools, homes, and all of those things. So it actually was about, I live in South Tyneside, I love South Tyneside. But very quickly, people start saying that works for me in my role. So the first sort of a movement into social action was probably from South Tyneside Homes, our Almo, who wanted residents to take more responsibility in their area. They wanted very much people to, you know, keep their garden tidy, but perhaps play a part in keeping the street tidy and you know, those sorts of things. And so they came under the banner of Love South Tyneside and realising that actually people can play a part in the community. We have a strong partnership, and one of the boards, the Cleaner Greener board, they wanted very much to grow social action, harness the social action that happens in South Tyneside, and that very quickly became very important during the start of the coronavirus pandemic, when actually what we wanted was people to volunteer safely in communities, you know, checking on neighbours, picking up prescriptions, perhaps doing shopping in a safe way. So we used the Love South Tyneside communications brand through a letter drop, which gave, here's how to keep yourself safe, but actually if you've got time and you're well and all of those things, you might think about being a volunteer. So again, that was the kind of thread that we used. And really what I wanted to do at Valentine's Day, because we always have a celebration on Valentine's Day of Love South Tyneside, was to actually think about other stakeholders in South Tyneside, so our businesses, and you know, they've located here for a reason, and get them to talk South Tyneside up, you know, and play their part in it. But again, very quickly, because of the social action side of it, we realised that we could not just as a local authority get involved in social action, but draw our community, business community in. So I want to talk about 3 people's stories that have touched me during this and how that's come about from the ground up. So the stories are of Bobby, Chris and Lewis. So Lewis, first of all, was through our care system, and I know we've got a speaker today from social care, which is fantastic. So Lewis was a care leaver who joined the army, found it didn't work out for him for medical reasons, and so he was back home without a job, and really, I guess, without a family, that family network that a lot of our children do have. He wasn't ready for an apprenticeship scheme with South Tyneside Council and South Tyneside Homes. He really didn't meet that level. So through our HR people and a very passionate managing director in South Tyneside Homes, what they realised is there's a whole cohort of young people who are not even at that level to be able to secure an apprenticeship, some of our needs. So they've created a social enterprise to help get people to do that sort of work in the neighbourhood, so some of the cleaning, green work, but equipping them with a mentor, equipping them with basic skills such as CV writing to actually get them to that threshold where they can take a role such as an apprenticeship. Now, I wanted to use that as an example because there's going to be so many examples and councils are going to have them all, but to say that that was a brainchild really of HR, spotting that action gap and thinking, how can I play a part as an HR manager, which is not where you tend to think about social values and social outcomes. You know, it's quite often the the procurement and commissioning spheres. So I just want to use that as an example, and anybody who is interested in finding out more of these examples, of course, I can go in more detail. But I want to move on to Bobby's story. I met Bobby at Valentine's Day through the Love South Tyneside event. She is a care leaver and a young mum. We consider every one of our elected members, every one of our employees are a corporate parent and have a responsibility and a role to support children in care. So it tends to be an area of social care where you think, oh, well, social values, that makes sense sitting there. But this was a little bit different because Bobby has been an advocate to other people in the care system, sort of raising the profile of the qualities and the skills that some of our young people have. So, you know, I have children. They've obviously been very well supported, you know, supported through college, through university, through school, and, you know, that support that a parent wants to give. But the resilience that Bobby talked about and the value to an employer really was quite striking, because she said, at age 18, you don't just get, you know, the key to the door, if you like. You get keys to a flat, you get, you know, some packing boxes, and you're off and you're in the big wide world. You might be on benefits, as she was, and you kind of don't have that support network that the other 18-year-olds around you might have. And Bobby really talked to employers about, I come with tenacity. I've been a self-advocate for, you know, the last 5 years. I've had to fight for everything, and talk about resilience and dealing with stress. I have all those skills that, you know, my 18-year-old might not have had. She did have the audience, you know, pretty much in tears. But what she did as that care leaver is got employers to pledge to take on care leavers when they're next doing employment. So just want to talk about Bobby's story, and that was facilitated through social care teams thinking about how do we play a wider role, but then those care leavers themselves thinking, how do I help other people who've been in my situation? Chris's story, Chris is one of our younger people with learning disabilities. He's now a paid employee at South Tyneside Council delivering community equipment. And Chris also came to our Valentine's Love South Tyneside event, and he worked on a whole suite of materials, leaflets, business cards, and so on, again to persuade employers that actually people with learning disabilities can really bring a lot. Now, this is a slightly different approach. We do have a dedicated skills team in the council who were established to, you know, help recruitment for people with learning disabilities. But Chris himself is another example, like Bobby, who's using his experience to help others and you know, support other people like him. And all of those stories, the threads that bind them to me are actually because I came at this from a communications perspective. So I wanted people to talk the place up. So Love South Tyneside is our campaign that started as a communication campaign, but actually has become a social action campaign. So the local CCG have joined in. They have seen it as a recruitment tool. So they want to attract from, you know, surgeons to nurses in care homes to everything in between, GPs, pharmacists. They want to recruit them to work in South Tyneside and locate to South Tyneside. So they've used the Love South Tyneside as a recruitment tool. And then our third sector really embraced it as that means to increase volunteering. And it was just absolutely easy to roll out during the start of the coronavirus pandemic for recruitment. But I think perhaps most importantly to me, it has shown officers in non-typical services, actually that social action is part of their role too. So when Councillor Chatfield, you know, said, how do you get that? People want to help, but they don't know how. We've found a real vehicle for that. So following the Valentine's event, we had one of our accountants say, next time I'm employing, I'm going to employ a care leaver. We had our lead for leisure services saying, oh, I can really see how somebody with learning disabilities can do our front of house. I want to do that model differently. But it's not just about employment opportunities. I know the examples I gave were, but our facilities manager, he's worked with his caretakers, and they're lending resources to actually go out and improve the local area. They're cleaning up the River Tyne in the spare time. So they're really improving the environment. We've also got an asset manager who's supporting Friends of the Parks to play a part in civic life. So, you know, giving them the tools, equipment, training, safeguarding training, and so on. So I suppose my closing messages are, although the Social Value Act really formalised the responsibility for local government, and perhaps that's why some people see this as a corporate procurement or commissioning function, the reality is we'll all have some of these excellent practice, these excellent examples in our organisations, and for us here, we found those simple words, love South Tyneside, is that really clear message that everybody can buy into and see how they can play a part and being inspired by some of those stories. So I just wanted to tell you our story, and that's how I got involved today. Thank you.
Brilliant. Hey, thanks so much. And I think it struck me actually the whole range already of strategic and operational great anecdotes and stories that we've already heard about, and I'm sure there's a lot more out there. But thanks both. Phil, you've got to follow those two now.
Yes, yeah, big act to follow. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Hayley. It's quite thought provoking. So for the people who've arrived a bit later, I'm Phil Varghese. I'm a social work service manager in Salford City Council. Been there for 25 years, and I manage the leaving care service known as Next Step in Salford and the Missing from Home service. And what I tend to do in this 10-minute presentation is to explore the outcomes for care leavers and how what's called a local authority local offer and partners can improve social outcomes for care leavers on a national level. Just want to start really with some negativity in the sense of some stats for care leavers, because what's out there very clearly is the national figures for care leavers are remarkably poor. Custody statistics, for example, show and evidence that 50% of those in custody have some form of care experience. Education, employment or training for a care leaver is national around 46%, while those that enter in higher education is only 6%. There's poor health outcomes and homeless figures. So the list goes on and on for care leavers. But what I want to do is highlight, for example, some of the legislation, which is a gift really, certainly for my local authority, which has allowed us to improve outcome for care leavers. And there's two pieces of DfE statutory guidance. One is called the Applying Corporate Parenting Principles to Looked After Children and Care Leavers, which affects all local authorities and relevant partners, including anyone who provides a service to a member of the public, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. And the second one is the local offer guidance, which each local authority, i.e. leaving care service, and certainly if it's a privately run service, has to publicise online as what is their local offer for care leavers. And this is something that, taking on board the social value and social outcomes, is quite important to recognise if you're a councillor, or indeed if you're a chief executive or lead member in your local authority, because it does have implications in terms of the corporate responsibility, which Hayley rightly relates to for every local authority in terms of delivery of their service. So improving outcomes, if you like, for a care leaver, if you look at Salford, for example, there's a very strong corporate parenting ethos within the local authority, right the way up and down from a chief executive to a corporate parenting panel. And that corporate parenting panel includes a number of councillors from the whole range of parties available, affiliations within Salford, with one main aim, and that's improving the care leaver outcome within the city of Salford. So if you look at my team in particular, if you look at the makeup of the team and the monies that's been invested within the team, you've got, for example, partnership working with the DWP officer who's in the team, the substance misuse worker, the health worker, the psychological wellbeing worker, the GP who's attached as a very new provision within my team. And that's to embrace but also push outcomes for care leavers in all the areas of health, education, employment, etc., etc. But it also wants to push partners such as those in housing, in health and education, So again, like Hayley's mentioned in her presentation, I'm trying to break this down, what that means for partner agencies. If you look at our housing registered providers, we've asked them to provide whites, for example, for care leavers, because they're leaving care. And as you rightly say, we're not much support from family, but wholly dependent upon those who have corporate parenting responsibility, the social work teams, the health representatives, etc. So we also look at, for example, giving them priority within the housing bidding systems. So therefore, you can't get higher than a care leaver who's bidding on a property, and we've prioritised and allocated that property with the right support. But we're also pushing the registered providers in other areas which are quite creative. So, for example, who knows how to, when you get a new property, put up a curtain rail? Who knows how to do the wallpaper or painting? And therefore, we're asking for our housing providers to provide that kind of support as part of that local offer. In terms of health, so for example, who provides a health passport for care leavers when they leave care? Who, for example, can provide support if they become pregnant or indeed need support around their parenting abilities? Can we now, as I mentioned before, we now have a GP attached with it, or we will have a GP attached from the 1st of November in the leaving care service, because it's often the case that our care leavers won't access mainstream GP services. And therefore, again, as part of the local offer will be, we can access a GP somewhere where you feel it's more comfortable within the local office, which they've visited many times. In terms of education, Salford have 15 apprenticeships for care leavers, but I think you do really hit the nail on the head, Hayley, because although the government agenda is apprenticeships, what we're finding is a lot of young people are not apprenticeship ready. What we require are pre-apprenticeships. Those apprenticeships are too hard, they're out the reach of many of my young people. So you talk about work experiences, traineeships, for example, being provided. So we push, for example, colleges who not just deliver, let's say, courses, but they'll have someone who does, for example, the grounds or does the handiwork within the colleges. Can you give us an offer within that service, which Salford College do, and they offer pre-apprenticeships and work experiences on a short-term basis. We also have 4 care leavers within the social work team, which I manage. So again, preach what you say. We invest to deliver, if you like. So we've got young people having opportunities with placements, for example, across not just social work teams, but also in finance, if you're doing a finance degree, or indeed you need a placement in the environment because we're interested in working in the environmental sector. We also have a strong links with the virtual school team. So again, part of the agenda is improving outcomes for black young people, but also extends to those who are 21 to 25. It doesn't stop at 18 in terms of their corporate responsibility. We have a agreement with the procurement section within Salford. Any contract which is over £75,000, they will, within that contract or that procurement, want some example of an offer for a care leaver. So it might include, for example, a care leaver having a work experience there or apprenticeship. So if you look at our figures in Salford, we have 18% who are at university, with the national average around 6%. We are our OC3, which is DFE return for last year or to March of this year, was 76% or 76.4%. So again, the national average is 46%. So there are good outcomes taking place within Salford. There's some good examples of us pushing our partners in terms of providing experiences, providing support, but we want to go further. And the local offer gives us that gift. So if, for example, you have a provision out there or you're working within the third sector, then for me, the ask is certainly within the local authority is ask them for more. We're under their corporate parenting responsibility. So I'll just start to share some of the practice at Salford level. I think it's also worth mentioning Peopletoo are also involved at a GM level. So there's a driver across the board, across the 10 local authorities within Greater Manchester, to get some of these good practices across the whole of the GM local authorities, but also to share good practice and also explore the challenges and try to make better outcomes for care leavers in particular. So, Mike, that's my presentation, or if there's any questions about any of that.
Phil, thanks very much. No, it's been a fantastic initiative across Manchester, across GM, isn't it? Phil, and you've been very supportive, and with Andy Byrne, the mayor's been very much behind it, and a huge launch, and it's actually been fascinating. And it was kind of interesting, I think, came back to that point where Andy Byrne said to me, he said, well, the thing about it is I don't need a detailed financial business case to know this is the right thing to do. And I think sometimes that is what social outcomes have used, that it costs money, but actually in the end, some of this is inherently, we know this is the right thing to do. I think we've got time for a quick question. Michael, have we got a quick question with Sharon's question?
Yes. If there's anyone in the moment, but if anyone else wants to pop their questions into the chat, then we can pick them up. There's one from Sharon Taylor, leader of Stevenage Council, at the start of the session. Sharon asked, we have committed as part of our financial inclusion charter to submit a social outcome statement along with our statement of accounts each year. How can we work with this commercial auditor to ensure that they treat this seriously?
Well, I'm happy to hand that to the panel. And so it just sounds a tricky one. Councillor Chatfield, do you want to start us off on that?
You're right, that is a tricky one.
You got finance in your portfolio, so the auditors are close to your heart.
They are very. I have a great deal of affection for auditors, given I was previously the chair of the audit committee as well. So I've paid my dues of auditors, definitely. Well, I suppose the first point for me really is, I suppose, you take the auditors, take it seriously. I suppose that's a difficult one. I think perhaps what we should ask for is, what's the audience for that? Is the audience the public? Is the audience politicians, other councils? I suppose is the big question for me. I think one thing in Birmingham we tried to do, and we've never done it, and it's something I'm keen to do, is to get just regular reporting back on social value outcomes, because there is a danger that you do a report, you do a cabinet report which sort of lays out in great terms what social outcomes you're hoping to achieve, and then that's the last anyone ever sees of that disappears then into the ether. And so what we're trying to do is just establish a mechanism whereby just on a 6-monthly or annual basis we report that. So I think it's interesting that you struck upon that methodology, I suppose, in Stevenage. I suppose our approach is going to be more kind of traditional council route of cabinet report and then into full council. It's kind of our way of telling the story about the social outcomes. But it's an interesting approach. How you get the auditors to take it seriously is very challenging. I suppose it largely probably depends on the individual auditors. I'm sure some of them have a heart in there somewhere and are committed to this kind of agenda. But it's an interesting approach.
Hayley, because I know governance was something, and that sort of corporate statement was something we touched on, I think, a couple of months ago when we first chatted this through.
It absolutely was. So in our decision making, our elected members consider a range of things when proposals are put to them. So the typical ones that I'm sure all councils look at are the financial implications, environmental and sustainability implications. And one of the things we talked about potentially was, would other authorities find it helpful if we led a sort of piece of work around social values implications, so that when elected members are looking to make decisions, it's really built into the decision making right up front. So that was something we definitely chatted about as a panel.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks. We've got another question, and the thing which, Phil, is something I might start with you and back to Hayley again, which is a question about those real live experiences from Hayley and obviously yourself. The question was, how can local authorities bottle that reaction from a few so it leads to wider awareness and cultural change, which I think is one of the things we set the policy lab up, is how do we actually get some of this momentum into councils around us. And then I think from your side, Phil, how President Hayley, how do you, from what you're doing in the team, which is obviously great, how can that be expanded? Because you can do it through the sort of formal statement and a governance, but actually a lot of this just happens sort of more naturally, and I'm interested to how did you expand that? How does it grow, and how can other local authorities learn?
For care leavers, Mike, there have to be deliverables. So when Ofsted expects certain basics. So, for example, they have good opportunities for education, employment training. They have safe environments to live in. Their assessments are robust, for example. Contact should be 100%. So for a care leaver, the argument is legislative. If you don't provide what is expected for a care leaver in terms of Ofsted, then you're going to come out of a poor Ofsted outcome or inspection, which a lot of authorities have fallen foul of. And if we learn from and look at the themes across the board from a national point of view, from the ILACs, the assessments that are taking place at the moment, there is a common theme coming across from Ofsted, which is you're not promoting or you're not delivering for care leavers in these certain areas. So, for example, on a GM level, there's lots of evidence to say these are the basics which each local authority will provide. There are some authorities, and Salford's one of them, where enhanced offers through the local offer being provided. But you've got to get the councillors and the chief executive on board. Now, we've got a very strong, as I mentioned before, corporate parenting board, which is chaired by the councillor, and it's chaired by a lead member in their absence. Sometimes you have councillors with different affiliations, but it's a common aim. So I can sit very comfortable in that chair, that meeting, and say where the challenges are. But you've got to make sure each local authority has such a robust corporate parenting board with the right people on board who can make the change, and then pass that up, make sure quiet to lead members or chief exec when those deliverables are not being delivered, because it will affect an Ofsted.
Yeah. Okay. And Hayley, I think the question is how do you bottle your passion and commitment and pass that around to many local authorities?
I have one here. So we've tried to do this in a couple of ways. So first of all, we asked all of our employees, 70% of our workforce live in South Tyneside. So we asked our employees to be Love South Tyneside ambassadors. So they get to see those stories of social action by following us on social media. But one of the things again that we did through the pandemic was we saw the outpouring of support from communities for workers like refuse workers and perhaps social workers, and even some of the hidden workers like caretakers in schools who were opening up for families of key workers. So Hayley came along again with a Love South Tyneside hat on, and actually we did a dedicated campaign called Proud to Support. So what we said to staff, so to answer the sort of question about cultural change and how do you get this through the organisation, we asked staff to nominate the colleagues, the teams. We asked managers to nominate the teams who were going above and beyond during the pandemic. So some of those, were workers who were doing their full-time job, and then they were out on an evening, they were, delivering medication, or had librarians doing the shielding hub, taking calls, doing welfare calls. So again, we use the Love South Tyneside banner to really draw people in, and it's almost become a replacement for our staff awards this year. So we normally have a staff awards, a celebration where we get people in a sports hall that will make look really nice, and we can't do that this year. So we're actually looking to see how we can use that Proud to Support under the Love South Tyneside banner to recognise staff. And because all of the threads that I've talked about, as I said, it started as a let's have communities talk the place up. It's become a recruitment tool for the CCG. It's become a social action tool. It's now actually a way of employee engagement in reconnecting them to the community. So we thank the ICT guys for all of the things that they did to keep democracy going. So that's the kind of the cultural change. Honestly, everywhere I go, I say Love South Tyneside. People must be sick of me, but I really genuinely haven't had a negative response to it yet.
So and IT will love that plug because they don't often get a positive plug. So they like it. And finally, I'm conscious of time. Councillor Chatfield, and I know we talked about this again before this. How does this become a cultural change outside of procurement? Because I know in Birmingham you said a lot of this was driven by your corporate procurement. And one of the challenges, how do you get this outside of corporate procurement into something that sits within the services? And so the final word to you.
I suppose for there's a couple of quick things to draw out. One of them is it is cultural. It is about getting that message right from the top, but all the way through the organisation, and sharing good examples, because there are good examples, not just Birmingham, but also across some of the great ones we've heard today. We've done things around care leavers, etc. But I think they do tend to be reported within the little world at which they exist, rather than more broadly in the organisation. So I think that's part of it. And part of it is, unfortunately, there needs to be you always, as ever, need to wrap a little bit of bureaucracy around these things in local government. And if officers can't respond culturally, then they have to kind of be made to respond by ticking boxes, which is depressing and disappointing, but it does kind of have its role. So just making sure that there is some oversight as to whether have you thought about the social outcomes, social implications of your decision making, and have you considered what extra opportunities there might be through this contract. And then just that prompt will then hopefully beg more questions, and then you get into a dialogue about it. And also, I suppose for us, where the step change comes is around officers and service areas having a really clear vision themselves about what outcomes they're trying to achieve. So yes, there's a corporate view of the world and what our big priorities are, but actually within directorates, they should be saying, well, what are we actually trying to achieve through this? We're building a road, fine, but actually what's the broader benefit to the city that ties into our inclusive growth department? What does it tie into an inclusive growth agenda that we're meant to be leading as a directorate? So we get all of that thinking going, and it is happening sporadically. As I said, it's just a case of embedding it across the organisation, but we'll get there. But I think there's a lot. It's that reporting cycle and constant talking about it that I think helps.
Okay, well, given time, thanks to the panel. Thanks to all of you for your contributions, and absolutely fantastic. And as I said, Michael, recording will be available wider, and then we'll feed back to CCIN, obviously, as we go through the policy lab and group session. So thanks again to the panel, and thanks to you all for joining us. Okay. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.